Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So it's Thursday, time for another update on the trucking market and rates. And this week I was particularly curious. As some of you guys remember last week, what we saw was that even after the inspections were over during Blitz Week, rejections kept rising. So the question is, what is happening now? What's happening with rates, rejections? Are they still rising, or was it just the Blitz Week effect? So let's go ahead and take a look at general volumes, rejections, capacity, diesel prices, and then focus on what's happening on the spot market for dry vans, reefers, and flatbeds. Ready? Let's go. All right, first we have the general overview right here. General volume. As we can see, week over week, general volume actually fell by almost 12%. However, rejections, they are still rising. So they actually went up by 8.33% week over week, and they're currently at 6.76%. Now, in terms of the spot market volume also decreased by 12%. And the spot rates actually fell by about 1 cent per mile if we take a look at all equipment types. All right, let's take a look at diesel prices. So in terms of diesel prices, this is the price at the pump. I get this data from AAA. And the first thing I see is that Texas and Oklahoma actually went down. So they are cheaper now, and they're between $3 and $3.10 per gallon on average. But in general, we can see it's the West Coast, which is the worst when it comes to the price at the pump, followed by the Northeast. The closer you get to the middle, the cheaper the diesel prices get at the pump. The question is, what are diesel prices, the raw ones, without IFTA taken into consideration? Illinois is always the cheapest. It's between $2.70 and $2.80 per gallon if IFTA is taken out. But in general, the pattern is the same. The West and the Northeast are the most expensive, and the closer you get to the middle, or in this case, actually to the South and Midwest, the cheaper it is without IFTA taken into consideration. But what happened with diesel prices in general? Well, we can see that week over week, they did go down by almost 2 cents per gallon on average. But month over month, we can see that it was actually a tiny little increase. I mean, you won't even feel it, but still, it was an increase. And year over year, diesel prices are about 32 cents lower than this time last year. All right, let's take a look at what's happening with MC numbers. Last week, we saw that for the first time in months, there was a net decrease in MCs. Well, it's back up again. So the white line shows you zero, or as close to zero as possible, which means the same amount of carriers came in as went out. So there is a zero net increase or decrease. This time around, as of last week, there was actually a net increase by 58 MC numbers. So yeah, the trend of more people coming in than leaving the industry continues, except for last week. We'll see what happens next. All right, time to look at the spot market. We're starting with dry vans, and this table's data comes from FTR Intel. So actually, dry vans are continuing to see increases, and this is for the week after Blitz Week, right? So last week. So spot rates week over week actually went up by about 7 cents per mile. Year over year, spot rates for dry vans are about 1.5% higher than this time last year. That being said, volumes dropped by 20% week over week, but they're still 3% higher than this time last year. Let's take a look at some maps that I make using truck stop data. So anything that is white, mostly it's the plain states, the northern plain states, as well as the Pacific Northwest. This is 0 to 100 loads per truck. The darker it gets, the more loads come out of that area. And then blue is 2,000 to 3,000 loads available, which is Georgia, and Texas has over 3,000 loads. In general, for dry vans, it seems it's the South and the Midwest, as well as some of the Southeast that has more freight. The question is what's happening with those load to truck ratios on the spot market. So anything that is a shade of red is is basically overcapacity. It's just the darker it is, like Washington or New Hampshire, those are the worst. There is 0 to 0.2 loads per truck. The lighter it gets, the better it is. It's still over capacity, but it's better. Anything yellow is pretty much equilibrium, 1 to 2 loads per truck. Be careful because this is using load board data. And what we can't control is how many times one broker posts one load 100 different times and whether all the trucks are actually posted in the area. And then 2 to 3 loads per truck exists in Oklahoma, Arkansas, Georgia, and South Carolina for dry vans. All right, let's take a look at reefers now. So reefers were not as lucky with the data. Reefers actually saw about a 1 cent per mile decrease on the spot market week over week, but the rates are still 1% higher than this time last year. Volumes also dropped like crazy, 19.3% down week over week, and year over year, volumes are 4% lower. So that's kind of sad. Now, in terms of volumes, most of the volume comes out of California and Texas. But if you take a step back and you look at the market in general and see what surrounds each state, you'll see that more volume in general originates in the Midwest and the East Coast as well as the Southeast for reefers. Texas and California are kind of outliers. All right, load to truck ratios. So as we can see, the East Coast, the Northeast, the Pacific Northwest, not good places to be at all. Now, in terms of equilibrium, there are a lot of places that have equilibrium. Those are the yellow states. And then there are 4 places which have 2 to 3 loads per truck. Idaho, this has been the case for weeks now. North Dakota, Kansas, and Mississippi. Does that mean that you're going to get an amazing rate from a place like North Dakota? Not necessarily. What you need to do is always compare the load to truck ratio to the volume map to see where there are more loads, because North Dakota actually has 0 to 100 loads, which means that if you don't get lucky and there are no loads there, you're not getting any rate. Finally, last but not least, we have our flatbeds, which, I mean, they're kind of in between what the reefers and dry vans saw. So flatbeds actually saw no change in terms of the rate per mile week over week, but the rates are about 2% higher than this time last year. Volumes week over week also dropped 11% on the spot market, but are still 18% higher than this time last year. So let's take a look at what's happening with those loads and load to truck ratios. So as you can see, Texas is the place that has 8,191 loads as of yesterday. Alabama is the second highest, 5,000 to 8,000 loads. Insane. And this is, of course, considering the whole state, right? Not specific cities within the state. The third best place is Arkansas, 4,000 to 5,000 loads. But in general, it's the Midwest, the Southeast, and the South that has the loads for those flatbeds. The question is, does this translate to a good load to truck ratio? Well, as you can see, most of the map is red, which means overcapacity. However, what we can also see is that there are areas that have over 3 loads per truck, over 7 loads per truck sometimes. And of course, those areas are Mississippi and Alabama. They're always the best. They see the best load to truck ratios, although this load to truck ratio actually dropped from a couple of weeks ago. Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, this is where you can get better rates. This is where brokers definitely do struggle to get their loads covered, but this is also the place where you will rarely find long loads. I know, because this week we have been sticking to these areas, and yeah, long loads are pretty challenging to find. So what we see this week is a mixed bag of data. On one hand, for all equipment types as well as in the general market, the volumes went to crap. Now, could this be the Memorial Day effect? Possibly. On the other hand, what we saw is that the rejections keep going up. They went up by 8.33% week over week, which is not a small change. The question is, again, is this the Memorial Day effect? And the answer to this is very possible, because some capacity does leave for this long weekend. And of course, when capacity leaves, especially from the contract market, there are more rejections. Another thing to remember is that for the 3 main equipment types, we are creeping up on that seasonal freight, right? This is the season. It's starting right now. So understanding whether the foundation of the trucking industry is actually on the mend is going to be very difficult to pinpoint. What we do know is that there is a possibility of volume going up a little bit once those ships start coming into the port sometime in June. We know that seasonality is going to also possibly boost the volumes a little bit. And we know that there is a possibility that some capacity is going to exit the market due to the new out of service criteria on June 25th. But in terms of my personal experience, this is what I see. I see that we have been managing to book much higher rates as of late, but this is also because we are very careful about where we run. As I said before, we stuck to the best areas for flatbeds we managed this week. So yeah, the rates were higher. Has it become easier to book loads? Yes and no. Again, we stuck to the good areas. If you're a flatbed, for example, in the south, it's going to be relatively easy to book loads, especially those short runs for a high rate per mile and a good gross. But when it comes to weekend loads that will cover your weekend, which usually kick you out of the market, the good market, yeah, those are very challenging to book because there are not a lot of them. They very often pay like crap because even if there is no capacity in an area or limited capacity, everyone is still trying to get the long loads on Thursday or Friday. So you are competing against those people, which is driving those rates down. My question is, what has your experience been this week, whether you're a dry van, reefer, or flatbed operator? Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining and watching. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your week and weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning. See you in the next video.